Welcome everybody to the first of our successful ageing seminars for 2019 and on the exciting topic of a positive recipe for ageing. Is that the right name? Probably. And a recipe for positive ageing. I am actually the MC and I do have some details about the session, although you may wonder for a moment there. I do want to first of all say that for those of you who've been with us before, you may notice that Fern Cargill, who was our leader of the advancement team that put together the successful ageing seminars in their organisation, is not with us. And I just want to let you know that Fern was appointed as the bequest and research manager of the Women's and Children's Foundation, Women's and Children's Hospital Foundation. So we certainly are delighted that she's gone to do such wonderful work. But by the same token, we're extremely fortunate that we have with us now as the leader of our advancement team, Vicky Leckers. I want Vicky to stand up if she will. And Vicky came to us from a number of years, I think 9 years actually, at the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra as their fundraising guru, and then at Seymour College. So we're lucky to have a gem like Vicky amongst us. And her team comprising Donna Montez, stand up Donna please, and Sarah Farmer, and Anne Christie, I think, if I'm right. Up the back, okay, fine. I mention this to you because these seminars would not be run so well and so smoothly if I didn't have such a wonderful team. If you're interested in any of the work that is being done over the seminars this year, and you're interested in any of the opportunities to support research or bequests or scholarships, talk to any of those team members that I mentioned to you, introduced to you to. They will be more than happy to assist. Now, on to the seminar for today. Let me first of all say to recognise that we are on the traditional land of the Kaurna people and that we recognise and respect their cultural heritage, their beliefs and their relationship with the land. We have some new people with us, I understand, so a very warm welcome to you, and also an interstate person from Perth, so a particularly warm welcome to you as well. And a warm welcome to many of you who come regularly, whose faces I know very well. A very warm welcome. Now, a few housekeeping notes before we go on to the seminar proper. If you have a hearing aid or hearing device, do set it at T and it will gather up the hearing loop within the auditorium here. Otherwise, there are headphones at the front desk that you can collect. Important matters include toilets. Toilets are always important to tell you about. And when you come down here, male toilets are to the left, female toilets to the right. If you have a mobile phone, it'd be really good if you would turn that off now. The last thing before I introduce our first speaker is the matter of feedback. We do really appreciate your feedback, and there are feedback forms. You probably picked them up as you came in. Do take the time to write your feedback. We do take notice of it, and we do attempt where we can to address some of the issues, take on some of your suggestions. We do value it very much. So, recipe for positive ageing. We've got two speakers. First of all, Dr. Karen Murphy, and then we've got Dr. Janette Young. After the first speaker, we'll have a break for afternoon tea, which will be served outside, and then we'll have our second speaker. So each speaker will speak for about 30 minutes. Well, our first speaker is Dr. Karen Murphy. She's speaking about the Mediterranean diet, a recipe for healthy ageing of the heart and brain. Karen is a senior lecturer in food sciences and nutrition, and she's also a practicing dietitian. In fact, she told me just a wee moment ago that she still consults has a private practice in dietetics. She's had a lot of experience, 20 years, more than 20 years in nutrition and health research, but she's particularly interested in her research to explore the health benefits of dietary patterns, in particular the Mediterranean diet, and the link that it may have to reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease and dementia. Karen is really committed to sharing her research with others, both in the community and with other professionals, and that's one of her big emphases, to share the results of her research, but also to share it in a way that is communicated easily and in a way that allows sustainability. In other words, if you're going to change your diet, let's have it in a way that you can actually be sustainable in the changes that you make to your diet and your lifestyle. So now I want to welcome Karen Murphy to speak to us. Thanks so much.
Okay, yes, this is working fabulous. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come and present today. It's always a fabulous opportunity to come and talk about my research, diet, and, you know, only having half an hour is the only thing I would complain about, actually, because I've got so much that I would love to tell you and let you take away with today. But in the half an hour that I have now, I would like to talk to you about the Mediterranean diet. So a recipe for both healthy ageing of the heart and the brain. I think it's a very nice recipe. I enjoy this recipe at home. I must disclose that I drink red wine, but it's a wonderful dietary pattern to follow, and so hopefully today I'll be able to share with you some good information about it. So what I would like to do today is I want to talk about our two major killers in Australia. So first of all, there's heart disease, which is our number one killer. So coronary heart disease is our top killer for both males and females. And secondly is dementia and Alzheimer's disease. I think we're all well aware that we've got an ageing population and the problem's only going to get larger. But if you just have a quick look at this image up here, you can see here, if I'm pointing to the females, dementia and Alzheimer's disease is actually the number one killer for women now. That's overtaken coronary heart disease in the last few years. So they're pretty serious conditions. So let's just shift to heart disease for a minute. So I want to talk about the disease, a bit about the risk factors, and then move on to cognition and ageing and dementia as well, and try and link them together for you. So first of all, if we look at heart disease, I think we all know what heart disease is. It's characterised by coronary heart disease, by diseases of the heart and related blood vessels. I think you commonly know about angina, so heart pain, and also heart attacks. I guess they're the two most common components of coronary heart disease. And there's a number of risk factors. Some we can change and some we can't change. So older age, so we can't really escape that. We're all going to make that coffin at some time. It just depends how long we can cheat it for long enough. Being male, family history is a big risk factor as well. High levels of bad cholesterol. So you might have heard your GP talk about LDL cholesterol as being the bad cholesterol. So that's a significant risk factor also. But also low good cholesterol, so the HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol taking blood away from your arteries. Also high blood pressure, hypertension, having type 2 diabetes, smoking, high stress levels, but also low physical activity levels and being more sedentary. Poor dietary choices, as well as excessive alcohol consumption. And I suppose many years ago, historically we thought that cardiovascular disease was caused primarily just by high dietary fat and cholesterol, but research over years has actually shown it is actually much more than that. It's just more than just purely dietary fat and cholesterol. So shifting now just to cognition and ageing. So if you have a look at this, as we age, things change in our brain. So if I talk about firstly the two types of intelligence, so there's crystallised intelligence, which is up here. And so this is about knowledge, vocabulary, verbal ability. So this is about learning experience. So these are things we learn and that we experience. And these things that we tend to hold on to, okay? And then if you look at fluid intelligence, which is here. So these are things around time tasks, processing, memory, how you think about things, how you remember things, spatial abilities, spatial awareness about different types of things. And this is what we call fluid intelligence, so ability to think, reason and solve. So I guess examples of these things around crystallised intelligence, you might learn how to do something, so tie your shoelaces, you learn that and you can do that. Whereas fluid intelligence, the ability to think, is more like, if you're following a map, you've got to get on the train, get off at this stop, get on a bus, do those type of things. So that's what we mean sort of by fluid intelligence. You have to adapt, problem solve as you're going forward. And so these two things may change with age. So particularly when we're looking at crystallised intelligence, that sort of develops into early adulthood, of experience and ageing, you sort of develop that and you keep that. But as you get older, your fluid intelligence starts to drop off. So your cognitive function starts to disappear, and that's naturally what happens when you age. That's what we call age-related decline.
Could we ask if the front lights could be turned down? It's a bit hard to read.
Sure. Thought I had a question early on. Well, good. So these are things that can change over time. So what we're actually wanting to do is maintain and improve our cognition and delay decline. So we want to stay healthy in our brain for as long as we possibly can. That looks better, doesn't it? Yeah. So we want to avoid this accelerated decline because that's where you get mild cognitive impairment or MCI, and that puts you at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and dementia later on in life. So we want to try and stay healthy as we can for as long as we can. So mild cognitive impairment, it's sort of in between age-related cognitive decline and possibly dementia. It's minor problems associated with your cognition, so things like memory, attention, your thinking, your language. It might start to change, but it's not severe enough to affect daily life. It affects around about 5 to 20% of our ageing population over 65 years, and it puts you at a higher risk of actually developing dementia later on in life. But you can change that trajectory. So now if we look at dementia, I guess dementia is an overall an umbrella term for these conditions. So Alzheimer's disease is the most serious form of dementia. That occurs with the build-up of amyloid and tau proteins in the brain. So they're types of things that affect nerve cell function and signalling. And then there's vascular dementia. And so vascular dementia is really associated with problems related to the blood supply to the brain. So that might be associated with things like stroke, series of small strokes, and also blood vessel disease in the brain. So with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, there's no cure. There's not even any long-term pharmacological agent or drug that we can actually use to cure Alzheimer's disease or dementia, or even treat it for long term. So we need to be looking at other factors that can actually help us do that, but also prevention. So I think prevention is the key to healthy ageing, not only for a healthy brain, but healthy heart and pretty much healthy body. So again, with Alzheimer's disease and dementia or general cognitive function, there's things that you can't change, so your neurotransmitters, age, genetics, but you've got a range of modifiable lifestyle factors here that we can change. So you've probably heard of the gut microbiome. This has received a lot of attention in the last few years actually, which is a fascinating area that's on the up, and I'm absolutely fascinated by it. Psychological stress, HPA activity, which sort of deals with digestion, immune system, different things like that. Inflammation, oxidative stress. I'm sure everyone's heard of free radicals and how they mop up free radicals. Cardiovascular health, blood flow, and also glycemic control, so insulin and glucose levels. So these are all things that you possibly can look after as you're getting older to stay healthy for longer. So bringing the two together now, so cardiovascular disease and dementia, they actually share common risk factors. So individually they have their own. So things like hypertension, type 2 diabetes, high blood cholesterol, all of those things directly affect both cardiovascular disease directly and also dementia and Alzheimer's disease directly as well. But they actually share these common risk factors too. So things like ageing, your glycemic control, smoking, hypertension, obesity, dyslipidemia, where you've got high levels of bad cholesterol and low levels of good cholesterol. They're all common risk factors that these two diseases actually share. And we think they're sort of linked by a process of inflammation. So inflammation is also associated with the way blood vessels function as well. So how well your blood vessels can contract and relax. They might be occluded due to fatty plaque buildup and things like that in terms of atherosclerosis. And that actually may affect cerebral blood flow. So blood flow to the brain, promoting a hypoxic environment to your brain, so killing off, developing neuritic plaques, stopping transmission of signals and different things like that. And they eventually lead to cell degeneration and death. So you can start to see the link between the two. So we actually think now that having a range of cardiovascular risk factors midlife, so middle age, like 50 or so years, we're not exactly sure of that time frame, but midlife can actually predispose you for developing dementia later on in life. So I guess prevention, it really is the key. So really we need to be starting very early on in our lives to start protecting ourselves from these chronic diseases later on. So we think having high blood pressure may increase the risk of dementia, particularly vascular dementia, in terms of the way the blood flows around the body. So less blood flow gets to the brain if you've got high blood pressure. If you've got plaque build-up, as you're seeing in these pictures here, your clots might cause stroke in your brain and so forth. So there's all those things that can happen as well. So we actually think having those risk factors are going to increase your risk of having dementia later on. So by treating one, are you going to reduce the reduce the risk of developing the other one? And I guess that's where my research is really forming now. If we actually improve people's cardiometabolic health, can we actually reduce their risk of developing dementia later on down the track? So there's some key things we can actually do about that. Both have heart disease and both dementia have modifiable lifestyle factors, including diet, physical activity and things like that. So if we can combine this into one intervention, one lifestyle program, can we actually make a difference here? So modifiable lifestyle factors obviously include diet, good dietary choices, being physically active, low levels of stress, low substance abuse, including alcohol and illicit drugs, and also low smoking. There's other things as well, like environmental pollutants and other factors as well. So has anyone heard about the blue zones? Yeah, so blue zones. So this is what people commonly call now as the place where people forget to die. I love that phrase because it describes them so perfectly. So it's these places around the world have a large number of centenarians, so people living over the age of 100, but not only just living longer, but living healthily for a much longer period of time. And so there's common regions around the world that suffer from this healthy longevity. And you sort of think California, you think America, really? Would they be one of those places, not visiting their supermarkets and things? But Loma Linda in California, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria in Greece, and Okinawa in Japan. So it's these regions around the world that share some kind of common thing that keeps these people living healthily for far longer. And probably just looking at some of these pictures, you're probably starting to realise why. So there's some evidence-based common denominators between these different regions around the world. So these are the Power 9, is what the blue zones are calling them. So move naturally. So that doesn't mean going out and doing marathons, but it means moving naturally in your job. You know, if you're working in the mountains, you're crawling up and down mountains all day, you've got incident physical activity with your jobs or so forth. Purpose, knowing your purpose in life is a big one. A downshift, so reducing stress and things like that. Belonging to a faith-based community was a big common denominator between these. Probably particularly in Loma Linda, it's the Seventh-day Adventist community. Right tribe, so being around people with positive behaviours and positive attitudes seems to help as well. And loved ones first, so that family environment, taking care of one another. Then there's some dietary common denominators as well between the different countries. And it seems to be the plant-based diet seems to be the big one. Okay, so beans like legumes and things like legumes pulses are the go-to dish for many of these regions. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains seem to be commonly consumed. Small amounts of meat, particularly red meat, seem to be a feature. Moderate consumption of wine with friends and or food, apart from the population Loma Linda who don't have alcohol. And also eating until you're 80% full. So tying that bag off at 3/4 full and not overeating. Okay, so being mindful of what you're putting in the mouth and not stuffing yourself till you're completely overfull. So these are the common denominators between these regions. It kind of makes sense. So that's the focus of the plant-based diet. So that's what I'm really interested in, that plant-based diet, the power of these vegetables. And we know that from a lot of literature and over many years that plant-based diets are associated with a lot of health benefits, so lower risk of heart disease, cancers, better cholesterol levels, blood pressure, dementia, and also helps in terms of overweight or obesity. But there's some plant-based diets that probably are not so good in my opinion. And you don't have to cut out food groups like meat or carbohydrates or anything like that to get your actual health benefits. So there's one dietary pattern that's repeatedly been shown to be healthy but also sustainable diet as well, and that's the Mediterranean diet. And I'm particularly interested in this research just going by what the evidence has to show. So the Mediterranean diet, so what is it? So it's predominantly a plant-based diet. It's rich in whole grains, fish, seafood, fruit, vegetables, nuts and legumes. Extra virgin olive oil is the main culinary fat, so they practically bathe in this stuff. with moderate consumption of red wine, but also dairy foods and lower amounts of red meat. So Aussies, we're really big meat eaters, so we eat a lot of beef and a lot of chicken, but the Mediterraneans seem to eat lower levels of particularly red meat and processed meats. And also discretionary foods. So that was sort of the sweets and things are something that you would have on a social occasion, not a daily type thing that Western diets tend to have. And I think this is a typical representation of what Mediterranean diet sort of looks like. So what is in the diet that might elicit these health benefits? So pretty much it's a 4-to-1 plant to animal ratio. So if you have a look at this plate here, this is the little bit of meat that they've got on their plate. Yes, it's red meat, they do have it, and there's some vegetables on there. If you just try and work out what it looks like in a Western diet, can you imagine, I think the opposite here would be a giant big steak and a tiny bit of potato, maybe some green beans, and that's it. So very different already. And so because of that, you're getting lots of vitamins, carotenoids, which are those orange pigments that you might find in carrots, polyphenols that you find in red wine, tea, chocolate, dark chocolate, phenolics, flavonoids, phytoestrogens like soy, selenium, omega-3 fats, particularly from fish, and also the healthy monounsaturated fats you'll find from olive oil and nuts. And this is a Mediterranean diet pyramid. So you can see it not only talks about the food groups, but it encourages water consumption, herbal tea infusions, but it also talks about biodiversity and seasonality of different foods, culinary activities, social occasions of getting together and eating, physical activity, so just sports, but also serving sizes based on frugality, conviviality and local habits and things like that. So it's not just focused on a diet. So the key there is, yeah, it's a Mediterranean diet, but it's also a lifestyle as well, so we can't forget that either. And by no means is it a new diet. We're all talking about Mediterranean diet these days, but you know, this was around for years. It's the traditional cultural diet of many people around the Mediterranean basin. But it was considered many years ago as a gift of the gods. The olive tree was an important symbol for the ancient Greeks. It was connected to their diet, their religion, and considered as a symbol of peace, wisdom, and victory. And archaeological finds have found stone mortars and presses used for olive oil extraction back to 5000 BC. So clearly it's not a new diet. But I guess when it sort of started to gain momentum was back in the days of Ansel Keys, American nutritionist. And he was wondering why the wealthy populations in New York were less healthier than the smaller ones in Mediterranean regions. And so he wanted to find that out. He thought it must have something to do with diet. So Greece had the lowest level of blood cholesterol and heart disease as an outcome of one of these studies. So he looked at nearly 13,000 men between 40 and 60 years over 7 countries. So Greece, Italy, former Yugoslavia, US, Finland, Netherlands, and Japan. And those populations around the Mediterranean, the Greek populations, had the lowest level of blood cholesterol and heart disease. And they actually found that animal foods such as meat, butter and hard margarines, they were the ones with saturated fat that were associated with the high risk of coronary heart disease over the next 25 years, whereas the plant foods and the healthy monounsaturated fats actually did the opposite thing. So this was a landmark study of its time many years ago. And then in more recent years is the PREDIMED trial. So PREDIMED trial is the latest landmark trial, I think, because this is another big study, 7,500 men and women with no previous heart attack, so primary prevention. They had some risk factors for heart disease. And it was done out of Spain, or a number of different centres out of Spain. And so what these investigators did, they compared 3 groups. So Mediterranean diet with extra nuts, Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil, comparing that to a low-fat control diet. So low-fat diets, we've been using these for years in terms of preventing and treating heart disease and things like that. We're moving away from that now because it's unrealistic. And we're now looking at more substituting unhealthy fats with healthier fats. So they studied these 3 groups over time, and they actually showed some significant health effects. So if you have a look at this graph here, so this is the time. So the median follow-up was nearly 5 years' time. This is the control low-fat diet here on this black line, and the 2 Mediterranean diets are here in these coloured lines. So the closer you are this direction is where you want to be. Okay, so what they actually found that these 2 Mediterranean diets, 30% less likely to have a cardiovascular event, so meaning something like heart attack, stroke, or death from cardiovascular causes. So 30% less chance of that happening by just following Mediterranean diet with other nuts or olive oil. That's really significant. In looking at overall mortality, so again here you see it's the same kind of graph, but they've actually showed here the Mediterranean diet, just with the extra virgin olive oil, there was actually 10% lower chance of actually dying, overall dying, not from specific cardiovascular disease, but overall mortality from following a Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil. So fabulous results, absolutely fabulous results here. Then they went on to look at diabetes, and so again in a part of that population of that study, they actually showed that having a Mediterranean diet with olive oil and nuts had a 52% less chance of developing type 2 diabetes than following a low-fat diet. So again, quite significant. So if you're thinking about it, the Mediterranean diet's quite a high-fat diet, but it's a high fat with good fats. It's not those bad saturated fats. And then they went to look at cognitive function, so looking at risk factors and cognition and things like that going towards dementia and healthy ageing as well. And they found with their low-fat diet, compared with their low-fat diet, memory tests improved significantly in the Mediterranean diet and nuts group. So you can see here, if it's going up, it's better. And in terms of decision and problem solving, those areas of the brain that are affected, you can see here, the Mediterranean diet with olive oil actually had more improvements than a low-fat diet, and that was after a median follow-up of 4 years. And then also similarly global cognition, which is your overall cognitive function. So they combine all of those tests together to see what your overall cognition is like. So again, better in the group following Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil. So some great results. So to back that up, I suppose, there was a meta-analysis that was published quite recently, and this is the highest level of evidence that you can get according to our National Health and Medical Research Council. So this umbrella review of this meta-analysis looked at nearly 13 million individuals and 37 different health outcomes. And they looked at the strength of evidence without bias to see which had a relationship with Mediterranean diet. And they actually found that high adherence to a Mediterranean dietary pattern was associated with reduced overall mortality, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease and heart attack, overall cancer incidence and reduction in neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, as well as diabetes. So I guess now some of us are calling this, is it perhaps a cure-all type pattern to follow? But that's some good solid evidence as well. But what about Australians? We don't live in the Mediterranean, we live here, and this picture here unfortunately represents about 67% of us adults, and 1 in 4 kids look like that, so that's our obesity. And with obesity comes a range of chronic diseases as well. It brings heart disease, diabetes, inflammation, depression, dementia, all of those things, okay? So it's a risk factor for both heart disease and dementia separately, but you have one, you're likely to get the other. So Australians, can we go from this? And you may laugh, but this is actually how our diet's characterised in the literature. This is what depicts Western-style diets, so Americans, US, and us. And these are types of foods that are rich in added sugars, saturated fats, salts, and things like that. So how can we go from that to that? I certainly don't eat that. I don't know who does, but it's horrific. But then looking at our Western diets, this graph here, so 100% is the percentage of people in Australia, according to our last health survey, that aren't meeting those guidelines. So nearly all of us aren't meeting guidelines for our vegetables, legumes or beans, not meat for fruit, hardly any for milk, yogurt, cheese and alternatives, meats and alternatives or grains. But this here is meeting the guidelines, so we're exceeding the level of unsaturated spreads and oils that we're actually having. So can you believe that? Nearly 100% of us aren't getting our recommendations for vegetables. And that's why, because we're getting 35% of our energy coming from these discretionary food groups. They taste good, they do, I admit it, but they're not healthy for us. So this is how the Medley study started. So this is one of our trials at the UniSA that we conducted many years ago. And this was one of the first of its kind to be done in Australia, actually giving a Mediterranean diet ad libitum, so asking people to follow a dietary pattern in older Australians to look at cardiovascular risk factors and also psychological function and cognition. And so we had the Medley study, so we had average age of individuals for 71 or so years old and healthy BMI for their body mass index for their weight. So relatively healthy population we were looking at. So this was a 6-month dietary intervention trial with 152 volunteers we recruited from the general public, which we're always so thankful for. We screened. They gave consent and were enrolled in the study. A week before our study started, they collected a week-long measure of blood pressure for us at home. It's the most accurate measure of blood pressure we can get, morning, afternoon and night, and collected their dietary intake as well, so really detailed information on their diet. We randomised half to a Mediterranean diet, so a traditional Mediterranean diet, what I've just spoken about, and habitual diet, so we just asked them to follow their normal diet for 6 months. They came in to see us every fortnight over that 6-month period to see the dietitian. So we had a dietitian lead the trial. They're the experts in delivering dietetic information, counselling, helping people solve problems. And then we collected information at baseline, at 3 months, and then after 6 months as well. And that included information on blood pressure, heart health, blood vessel compliance, blood cholesterol, glucose, insulin, as well as cognitive performance and wellbeing, as well as measures of dietary intake and the level of adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And so what we found in this trial, so if you look up here at the top, first of all, this is Mediterranean diet adherence score. So this is a score that we can calculate how well people are adhering to this particular diet, so low, medium or high. Both our groups started at medium level adherence, and you can see after 6 months we managed to get our Mediterranean group up to high level adherence, which was significantly different from our habitual diet group, which was a fabulous achievement. They had 92% compliance to the diet, so that means 92% could have really high compliance to this diet over the 6 months. Anything above 70% for a dietary trial, people say that's pretty good. We had 92%, so that just sells itself, the diet, I think, that it's easy to follow, as well as our good staff, of course. Oxidative stress, as a result of this excellent adherence and compliance, we saw a reduction in oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is a pathway we think that dementia and Alzheimer's disease is caused by, as well as a key risk factor for heart disease as well. So by reducing that, we've automatically reduced, hopefully, our one mechanism of action that we think cardiovascular disease and dementia might be caused by. So this was a really good outcome. Blood pressure, some of these individuals were on antihypertensives as well. So even to have that additional effect of diet on blood pressure, we're able to see a significant reduction in blood pressure over these 6 months as well in the blue bars, which is our Mediterranean diet group compared to habitual diet group. And one of our most outstanding results is something we call flow-mediated dilatation or blood vessel functions. So this measure is a measure of your brachial artery in your arm. We do it by ultrasound in response to a stimulus, and it shows us how much your arteries can relax and contract in response to a stimulus. And after 6 months, we're able to significantly show a big improvement in how well your blood vessels can, how compliant they were with the Mediterranean diet. And so we had this research published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, which is one of the top 2 nutrition journals around. So fabulous results from Medley trial. So we then wanted to go on and have a look at some other factors in Mediterranean diet in Australians. So one, the Mediterranean diet's sort of got moderate amounts of dairy. Aussies, we need a bit more dairy in terms for bone health. So we wanted to see if adding some dairy to a Mediterranean diet could help reach our dietary guidelines for dairy. The interesting thing is Mediterranean diet, while we say it's low in dairy, it actually meets our estimated average requirement in Australia. And do you know what? Australians are only having about 1.5 to 2 serves of milk or dairy foods per day. So by putting them on this particular diet, Mediterranean diet with dairy, we actually increased their dairy intake, which is brilliant in itself. And we did another trial adding pork as well, just because we are big meat eaters, thinking, can we add another sort of white meat, I suppose, some would argue, just to help compliance with that in an Australian population. And you can see here from both trials, again, in the Mediterranean diet group, we're able to achieve high adherence, so get up to that score, and have high compliance to both the dietary interventions as well. So this orange line here means that the low-fat group diet adhered to their diet well, and our med diet group adhered to their med diet well and were able to achieve high adherence in those particular studies. So over 8 weeks in this population of high dementia risk individuals, so ones that had risk factors for heart disease, were able to show they could follow the diet as well and result in some clinical outcomes as well. So again, we saw improved blood pressure in our groups in the med dairy study, both at the home measures and the measures we did in the clinic, diastolic blood pressure and as well as heart rate as well. So we're able to mimic sort of what we did in Medley trial too. We saw a reduction in blood triglycerides, so that's a component of your blood fat, that's a risk factor as well for heart disease, and was able to change the ratio of your cholesterol to good cholesterol as well, which is really good outcomes for that. In Medley, we didn't see a change in cognitive function, and I think because we had a cognitively healthy population to begin with, they didn't have any mild cognitive impairment. And I think back then we were doing paper-based tests, and now we're moving more towards the computer-based tests that are much more specific in terms of reaction time, memory, and things like that. We had that in MedPork trial, and we actually were able to show that processing speed improved following a Mediterranean diet enriched with some pork. So processing speed, while it seems small, it could mean the difference between a car accident having a fatality or just an injury in that split second that it would take to respond to something. And also improvement in emotional role functioning. So that's sort of things around stress, depression, anxiety, and things like that. So that seemed to improve in the Mediterranean diet as well compared to the low fat. And I guess in South Australia, we've also done other studies that have depression. So this was the Healthy Med trial that has had a look at individuals with diagnosed depression. And depression is also a risk factor for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So they had a Mediterranean diet group with a Mediterranean style diet, but also had fortnightly cooking workshops, social interaction, things like that, compared with a social group that did all of that except had the diet. And so then after 3 months, they were able to improve their diet quality, as you can see here, going from blue to green up here in the Mediterranean diet. The social group also increased a little bit, but not as much as the Mediterranean diet, so they were following the diet well. And you can see here, this line represents severe depression, and where both groups sort of started out, had quite severe depression, and both Mediterranean diet reduced that to significantly below that level, as well as the social group, but Mediterranean diet had that greater effect on those depression scores. So again, some really good research coming out of South Australia. So I hear you all saying, wow, she's blown me away with all this information. How do I eat the Mediterranean way? I'm going past Coles on my way home to go shopping. I actually go to Foodland at Frueville. They are fabulous for their fruit and veg and all that, so I just drool when I go there. So we've got really good resources available to us. You know, people buy cookbooks and you think, God, I've got to buy 30,000 ingredients and 10 spices that I've never heard of, and they're going to go in the bin because it's just for one dish. Don't do it. Catherine Itsiopoulos is a colleague of mine, but I've bought these 2 books and they're absolutely fabulous resources. My 3 kids eat from it, and it takes such a short time to cook with only a few handful of ingredients, and it's so tasty. So these are some really good resources that are around. Don't be fooled by other cookbooks that have got 40 different spices and you don't need it. Mediterranean diet's quite simple. The base is generally a sofrito sauce, which is your olive oil, onion, garlic and tomato. And a lot of dishes come from that as well. So that seems to be the most common base. And then you've got Food is Medicine, which is another scientist. It's also a colleague of mine, and it's purely vegetarian recipes in here. So we've got some really good resources that can teach you easily how to change behaviour and how to prepare simple meals. We don't need to get sophisticated with it, which is a key message for people, particularly when I see them in practice. Comparatively, the Mediterranean diet's cheaper than a Western diet. So if you look here, this is trying to be fair, having some red meat, green pea casserole, beef with rice pilaf. It's about $3.42 a serve we've calculated, whereas a typical Australian meal with some meat and 3 veg, about $7.35. So same kind of food, but different, but cheaper, a lot cheaper. And then if you're just having the legumes and vegetables instead of that, it works out to be even cheaper as well. And of course, we can't forget the physical activity side of it. Almost must stress that and the other lifestyle components that are associated with the Mediterranean diet as well. Okay, it's not just diet. But the other thing too that we also need to consider is we can't do this alone. Behaviour change is really, really hard. So even as a dietitian in private practice, even trying to change my behaviours with different things, it's really difficult to do it by yourself. You need support for behaviour change. And it doesn't just come with your family at home, but it comes for these different areas that you live, your supporting environments where we spend 90% of our time. So street, sidewalk, bike lanes, creating those supportive environments in terms of the physical activity and feeling safe, being able to get out there and move more. But also schools and workplaces, start early, think about prevention and creating healthy behaviours that can be passed on through the years. Restaurant and grocery stores, I think they need to take make a huge investment in the health of our population, together with the government, non-government organisations, food industry and food retailers. You know, they're selling us food that's probably less healthy than it needs to be, you know, upsize this and buffet meals and things like that. While they're fabulous, we're always going for value for money, aren't we? And we just need to try and have them on board to help us make easier choices. But again, I'm the dietitian, I'm the kind of dietitian that says everything in moderation. So I'm not silly, but I'm realistic as well. And community programs. We do need community programs back in that support these type of healthy behaviour change. So tips to eat the Mediterranean way. Top 10 tips. Extra virgin olive oil is your main dietary fat. Vegetable salads with every main meal. Use herbs and spices to flavour your foods. Legumes twice a week. Fish and seafood twice a week. Meat, chicken in less often, but also in smaller portions. Portion size is the key. But also whole grain sourdough breads, fresh fruit daily, fermented dairy yogurt every day, like Greek yogurt is great. Nuts every day, a small handful, 30 grams, and also wine in moderation, and always with meals. So don't binge drink. You can't save up your 14 drinks to the Saturday night, okay? So spread them over. So the top 10 tips to eat the Mediterranean way for that. So thank you very much. That was my last slide. So I just want to acknowledge my team at the university. Thank you for the organisers here for for giving me the opportunity to present to you, and hopefully I've encouraged you to think about the Mediterranean way as part of your healthy lifestyle. So thank you.
Well, if you were hoping you could remember all that, worry not, because the presentation will be on the university website within about, well, with Easter in the way, perhaps within 2 weeks. And you'll be able to look at those slides again and consider the compelling case that Karen has made. I'm sure you'll have a number of questions, and this is the opportunity now to ask them.
My question is, where does avocado fit? And is avocado a fruit, a nut, or a vegetable?
Why you're laughing? Avocado's great. Smashed avocado. Avocado's fabulous. It's full of the monounsaturated healthy fats. Okay, so it is a fat. So if you're thinking about weight loss and energy content of stuff, yeah, it's high energy, but it's got the good types of fats in it that's not going to block your arteries. Technically, avocado is considered a fruit. But I guess people commonly consume it as a vegetable as well. So I guess it sort of fits in both food groups really. And I suppose a serve of avocado, if you're thinking about serve sizes and things like that, a quarter of a size of avocado is roughly probably about one serve size. But very good source of monounsaturated fats, and I encourage people to have it.
One over here. Pat.
Ruth. Thank you very much for your words. I'd just like to throw a little disconcerting thing that happened to me at you. One very upset doctor one morning, and it would have been at least 15 years ago now, I had the call from him and asking me what the heck I had done because my cholesterol level was up to between 15 and 16, whereas normally it's 3 or 4. And I said, the only change I've made, which I did after my first husband died, thinking I've got to look after myself, is I changed from canola oil that I always used to olive oil. So I went on and off for a month, and about 4 months we went a different level. And every time I was on the olive oil, my cholesterol rocketed. When I came off it, it dropped back to normal. Now, I'd always known I used to say, allergic to olives. I could never eat olives because they made me ill, almost.
Yeah.
So
That's really interesting, actually, and I suppose that's probably quite an isolated case, particularly if you've got that allergy associated with olives. There's obviously something in your metabolism that your body's doing differently. Because
you are not Mediterranean, you are Caucasian. And he said you would be surprised how many Caucasian people cannot have olives.
Interesting comment, yeah. And I suppose, true, we're not Mediterranean. Maybe that's the genetic component as well that you see with common denominators between those blue zones and countries like that. But the interesting thing is none of the vegetable oils have cholesterol. There's no cholesterol in any vegetable oil, it's a plant. So, and we sort of know now the cholesterol that you get from your diet. We all know about the egg story. 50 years ago, you can't eat eggs full of cholesterol, they'll raise your blood cholesterol. Then you can eat eggs now, they're fine, they're not going to raise, hang on, you can't have them. That constant story that changes. But we now know that what we eat in our diet in terms of dietary cholesterol is not a big predictor of raising actual blood cholesterol. So it's more of what your body can make. So I think it's things like the dietary fat, the types of dietary fat, like the trans fat, which is not a huge problem in Australia because our industry have done a really good job at eradicating the use of trans fats, but saturated fats are the ones that are going to raise blood cholesterol levels. In terms of your isolated case, it's really interesting. I've not heard of that before at all, but in most cases, olive oil or any vegetable oil shouldn't be raising blood cholesterol at any level. But very interesting.
My question was similar. Could it be an alternative oil, such as like sesame oil or something like that, or is it mainly the olive oil that the
raising blood cholesterol, do you mean? Yeah. Well, it shouldn't be. The only thing that we can sort of think of, coconut oil. So coconut oil's been a huge rage for a while now, and people are dying to swap over to coconut oil from their plain vegetable oils. But I wouldn't recommend you do it because coconut oil actually has the types of fatty acids in it that will raise blood cholesterol levels. Okay, so that's what a lot of people don't actually realise. I think coconut, it's a vegetable, will be fine. But there's different types of fatty acids that have different effects. And in coconut oil, it's got those types of fatty acids that will raise your blood cholesterol level. In olive oil, they don't have that. All vegetable oils have some kind of saturated fat in them. They do, but it's the proportion of different types of fatty acid that make the difference. And it's the extra virgin olive oil that has the highest level of monounsaturated fat, but it also has other things in it called polyphenols, sterols, and plant stanols, and there are other things that are going to have healthy benefits to your heart as well. So bioactive compounds that are going to help with things like vasodilating, so making your blood vessels open up and let more blood flow through. So it's that component. But coconut oil, I'd be very sceptical. I don't recommend the consumption of it, is my personal opinion, just because of the fatty acid content of it. There's other healthier oils out there. Yeah.
Can you throw some light on this particular topic? When you go to the supermarket, there's about 15 different sorts of milks. Low-fat milk, smart milk, high-fat milk, this sort of milk, and they've all got trendy names.
Yeah.
I'm a milk lover, so I have my glass of milk every day. What is the difference, and what are the good ones, and what are the bad ones?
Yeah. I don't know. It depends what's good and what's bad, I suppose. I guess our dairy consumption depends on your age and gender, how much you're supposed to be having per day. We're not really sure about if it should be low-fat milk or regular fat milk. The jury's still out there because there's not enough evidence to show that yet. So now we're recommending a mixture of both, but watch the portion sizes. In terms of the milk, there might be some that are higher in protein. Everyone loves protein these days as well. A lot of people will just meet their basic protein requirements from a healthy, balanced diet. We don't need to have masses of protein in our body. As we get older, maybe a bit more to maintain our muscle mass and get rid of the risk of sarcopenia, so muscle wastage. Soy plant milks and things like that, you know, they're all good to have. But again, you've got to watch the calcium content in it as well. And sometimes they're sweetened or unsweetened. So you've got to be a bit savvy about what you want to get out of milk. If you just want to have some milk, well, just buy plain milk, you know. It depends what you like. So go by what you like, but don't be misled by fancy labels and things like that. So to summarise that rant, if I'd say dairy, have what you're supposed to for your age and gender, and have a mixture of low fat and regular fat dairy.
Yes, thank you. You didn't mention continental sweets, sugars, Turkish coffee.
Yeah.
Where do they sit in the equation?
Everything in moderation. So absolutely everything in moderation. You have to live, but you've got to be sensible about living as well. So coffee's fine. There's actually things in coffee that are supposed to be heart healthy and also help with diabetes as well. And also in the sweets and things like that. So in terms of the Mediterranean, they would often have sweets on social occasions. So it might be on weekends or parties or things like that. But it's not something they would have probably every day. They would be having more of the fresh fruits and nuts, you know, with honey as the natural flavouring, things like that. But, you know, Westerners, we're not going to do that, are we? So we need to make some cultural different changes for that. So everything in moderation, but watch what you eat and just eat less of it, pretty much.
I'm very interested in Michael Mosley and his gospel. Do you have an opinion on this controlled fasting?
Oh, the intermittent fasting?
Yeah,
it's I guess that's another area that's growing at the moment. And I suppose there's scientific publications that have come out, and from our research group as well, that shows that it is beneficial in some sense, that it has no difference from other particular diets. I guess the key with all diets is, depending on what you're wanting them for, if they're going to work or not. So whenever someone comes to me and says, I want to try this diet, this fad diet for weight loss, will it work? Well, every diet you're going to try for weight loss is going to work. If it's the lemon detox diet or the paleo diet, it will work for a very short period of time until you get sick of it, because it's too hard to follow in the long term. It's too restrictive, cutting out masses of food groups, and it's not a behaviour change. You haven't learned how to make your behaviour change and sustain them. So in the short term, yeah, they'll work. In the longer term, probably not sustainable. So probably not worthwhile. But again, it's up to the individual person what works for them too. I love Michael Mosley. He's very entertaining sometimes. Lots and lots of publications from his books and things like that. You know, it makes some sense. I do enjoy it. But again, it's got to work for the individual, and you've just got to think about behaviour change and making healthy choices forever to stay healthy.
One more question.
I realise that nuts have different rankings in the oil field, but where would you put peanuts?
All nuts are pretty good because they're all
But
rich
they're
in...
not technically nuts, are they?
Peanuts, yeah, there's some, yeah, you're right actually. I can't remember that little
Are
grey
they
around
a
that.
baddie
Yeah.
or a goodie?
Yes, in terms of our Australian dietary guidelines, that they do come under the nut group as well. So yes, they've got some protein in them, they've got bioactive nutrients in them, but they've got the healthy monounsaturated fats as well. So no problem in consuming them. Don't have the candied ones, the ones that are deep fried, obviously, because they add sugar. And watch portion sizes as well. So 30 grams is only a very small, measure it out and see what it actually looks like. So one small handful a day is really good. And we know from nuts, having a handful a day is associated with having a lower body mass index and better heart health as well. In terms of the diets they used in the PREDIMED trial and our medley trial, we use walnuts, which are rich in a fatty acid that's supposed to be heart healthy as well, almonds and hazelnuts, so a combination of those three together.
And within the class of the olive oils, why do you put the extra virgin and leave the other olive oils out?
Yeah, I guess so. Extra virgin olive oil is the highest grade of olive oil with the highest level of polyphenols in it. So the polyphenols are those bioactive nutrients that we're really interested in. And a tip, I suppose, again, you know, all the thousands of milks that you get out there, there's thousands of olive oils as well. So don't be misled by that. People think, I'm going to buy one from Italy. It's got to be great because it's Italian. But do you know what? A lot of them are actually blended oils and they're not actually pure olive oil. They might be blended with another vegetable oil. So my tip is when you're going shopping, look for the certification on your label of your bottle that says that it's certified in Australia because it's gone through a real critical process of being judged and has a certain amount of polyphenols in it. I'm not paid by Cobram olive oil, but to me, that's the best olive oil that you can get on the market. The sheer taste of it, the quality, and it's been certified as well. And it's often half price at the supermarkets too. But yeah, I do like their olive oil.
I think we better stop at that point now. I know that Karen will be willing to answer some questions in the break, but do remember that there is some afternoon tea just outside the door, and we'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Thank you so much. Can I have your attention, please? Thanks very much indeed. We did have a request for red wine and dark chocolate for afternoon tea. I'm awfully sorry about the budget for these seminars. It doesn't extend quite that far, but nonetheless, thank you for the suggestion, though. I would be very supportive of that myself. Well, we now have a totally different topic, and one probably dear to the hearts of pet lovers or people who have pets. The topic, of course, is the positive impacts of pets as we age, physical, social and emotional implications. And Dr. Janette Young, who tells me that she qualified as a social worker some moons ago and worked in community aged care services, community capacity developing and so on, but now is in more of an academic and research capacity. But she's always been interested in what really brings quality to people's lives and has been particularly interested in researching the relationships between pets and human health, pets and ageing, pets in our everyday lives, and the rights, welfare and well-being of the animals we share our lives with, and how our needs may or may not align with theirs. I think this all suggests we're going to have a fascinating half hour with Janette. Thanks, Janette.
Thank you. How are you going, everybody? Good. You can hear me? Yes. Excellent. Okay, now there's been a request to put us in the dark so you can see the slides better. So here we go. Okay, so here we go. So the title, Physical, Social, Emotional Implications of Pets. So just a quick outline. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, right now. Then we'll talk about the physical impacts, the research that we know, social impacts, the emotional impacts, and there's also a dark side to pets, so we're going to just briefly touch on that, and then look at the future. So that's pretty much the roadmap for today. But of course, the obvious, and just to say, this is not exhaustive. So you always feel anxious that you're not going to cover everything. This is really just a skimming across things, and I'm giving you a story of what we're starting to understand about the nature of pets and how they impact in our lives. So, first question, who has a pet here? Yeah. Who doesn't have a pet now but had one perhaps in the past? Most of us, which may be that we have a skewed sample. Quite fair enough. But so we have an interest in pets and we kind of understand this space from our own experiences. So I think one of the things with this talk, it's quite different in some ways from Karen's talk, is that I'm a social scientist, and so the reason I'm interested in pets is, first of all, they're everyday. So there's something that we actually, you don't have to tell people to have pets, they have them. Like none of you got told to have a pet. Well, maybe some of you think your kids told you to. Yeah? Okay, fair enough, I'll take that back slightly. But that's really intriguing. And so it's a different question than for me, it's a different question than trying to prove that they work, don't work. It's actually more about how do they work, because people do it anyway, okay? People have kids, how do they work as well? You know, it's the same sort of space. And I'm interested in identifying these everyday resources that build our health, and that's really important because we're not very good at replicating the natural, and I'll pick up on a couple of those points as we go through some of the evidence. And also in terms of public policy, it's cheap. Okay, so if we don't have to tell you to do something that's healthy, that's a saving in terms of us not spending money on telling you to do it, but also in terms of there's these things embedded in everyday life that will have benefits for us. So fewer people going to the hospital, fewer people getting depressed, that kind of stuff. So that's why I've been interested in pets. Just to give you a feel for what the picture is in Australia. So this is household data. So it's about 62% of households in Australia have a pet, okay? And what you can see is that across the range of different animals, dogs are kind of winning, and then we have cats, and then birds are away behind, small mammals, reptiles, other. Who knows what, and other's everything, isn't it really? So 62%, so more than 50% of households actually have a pet. So that's that business about it's naturally occurring. Okay, so I'll quickly do a bit of a summary of pets and physical health. This is less my area, but I thought I'd better touch on it. So pets and physical health. This tends to be more in the quantitative space, which is not my expertise. My expertise is in qualitative, in social science, in talking to people and finding out how life works for them. But we have some really interesting stuff happening around understanding how pets can make a difference in terms of big population data sets. So this is some stuff from Kraus Perello was summarising. So most of the research around pets in this space has been on dogs and dog walking, okay? So what we know is that dog walking promotes physical exercise. Dog only promotes it. So certainly when people have dogs, they're more likely to be walking. And walking with a dog improves walking rehabilitation, even things like post-stroke. So we don't really know how that's happening, but there's some evidence that if you're looking at rehabilitating people, walking on your own is fantastic. Walking with a dog somehow seems to improve people's rehabilitation. Yet to find out. So that's one of the things about this whole area. It's a relatively fragmented space. So whereas we've got quite a wealth of data now around nutrition and food, this space around animals is far more fragmentary. So we're learning stuff. The problem is that we've tended to assume that people walk their dogs. Who's got a dog here? Yeah, who walks their dog? Who doesn't? Yeah, they don't like walking. So the reality is that not everybody walks their dog. So the presumption that underpins this is that people do. But we do know that even without dog walking, people still have a 12% higher activity level than non-dog owners. So even if you don't walk your dog like me, I'm still getting a 12% higher activity level, thankfully. Okay, so the other stuff that's really quite well established in big data sets is cardiovascular health impacts. So this is a nice link to Karen's work. So what we know is that where people have pets, where people particularly have dogs, and that's because we register dogs by and large. So you can get big data sets. We don't register cats and guinea pigs particularly, so you just don't have the data sets to play with. So what you get is cardiovascular impacts, lower blood pressure and heart rates when people are doing things like stroking a dog, but you also get faster recovery from things like heart stress. So people, if someone has a heart attack who's a pet owner and someone who doesn't have a pet has a heart attack, you get faster recovery rates in the people with pets. Improved long-term survival from cardiac conditions and stroke rehabilitation. So again, this is big data sets saying, yep, on the big data, this is definitely the evidence of what we're seeing. What you don't get with big data is the business about, okay, so we can see these two things happening, people surviving and they have a pet, people without pets not surviving at such high rates, but we can't tell the causation, like how it's working together, okay. And what I want to just notice here is, because I'll go to it in a minute, is that we have an increasing awareness that loneliness actually has cardiac impacts. So, and that's starting to go, okay, what's the causation here? What might be happening? And it may not be direct causation. It may be filtered. I mean, life's really complex. Human beings are complex, and the implications and impacts of relationships are complicated as well. But what we do know is that they make a difference. So here's some observations briefly on that sort of field around physical health and pets, is that it's predominantly focused on dogs. And we still are to start exploring other species, basically. This is just a little quote, though, from one of the people we interviewed a little while back. So it may be having an impact with other pets, though, as well, physical impact. So this guy had just got a stray cat come to live with them, and this was a quote from his wife saying he's walking more and talking more since the cat turned up. And he was there, wandering around, looking for the cat. Yeah, puss, 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 yeah. And that's called incidental exercise. And we know that that's really important for us, the everyday activity. And I think this is a nice example of probably what I would presume, I think, have I got this in this? You know, I talk ahead of myself and they go, oh, I've got to catch up with my slides. Is that this, pets promote everyday activity. You know, even if it's just, you know, getting yourself off the couch to feed the budgie or the fish once a week, that's that little bit extra exercise. Yeah, twice a week, I don't know. How often do fish need? So, oh, there you go, I did have it there. So pets are incidental exercise promoters. So you have to go shopping somehow, even if it's getting off your bum to go to the computer and, you know, do the online shopping or something. I'm thinking of the real minimal stuff. But we have to do this, we have to feed them, clean up after them. I've got foster kittens at present, I'm doing a lot of poo cleaning. I tell myself as I pick out the poo, this is exercise, Janette. And I think what's really, the other thing that I'm conscious of is that data's not individual destiny. And we have to, and it doesn't necessarily reflect individual change. So that's that big picture stuff. We can go, statistically, these things line up. If you have a pet, you're less likely to die sooner, earlier, what have you. But that doesn't, sorry, folks, but that's not a guarantee. However, it does increase your odds if you're a gambler. And there's probably some animals that impact more on physical activity than others. So I've got friends that are really big into horses. Anybody into horses here? Yeah, I've not had anything to do with horses, and I find it really fascinating how people are really bonded to horses. It's just a space I don't know. But there's much more exercise involved in caring for horses. You know, they have to, in all sorts of ways, they lug up the hill or down the hill to the sheds, and they have to clean out the sheds, muck them out. So lots of physical activity involved with them compared to, like I was saying, the goldfish. You know, it swims around in its little tank and, you know, you feed it a little bit every now and then. Less activity for you as a human with the goldfish. But other people I've talked to have had things like bird aviaries, reptile enclosures. Again, there's a level of physical activity that's just inherent in looking after those animals properly. So my sort of observation, my suggestion would be with that big population data is that there's all sorts of kinds of activities linked to having pets, and it's probably not just the dog walking, the walking stuff that's making a difference. So I'm really interested in the experience of having pets, and this is a little bit of stuff that we did, and this was around touch. So this comes out of some data interviewing people with the simple question of how do you reckon your pets impact on your health? And we got this stuff. So, and this is not stuff you get out of big data, it's really quite different sort of data. So this is some really nice stuff. So this is a cockatiel. I was interviewing this. So cockatiels, little birds, yeah, sit on your shoulder. Yeah, very sweet. And this guy saying he makes a noise, specific noise. I have to take him up, put him here, and you put him on his shoulder and he becomes quiet. And then we got Martha, who's a lap sitter, Eleanor, who's a chest sitter, which I think, I haven't put the note there, I'm pretty certain is cats, otherwise, horses, no. And just how people find it. So it's relaxing. It's just very relaxing. So is this resonating for some of you with pets? You know, like you sit there and you can de-stress with the animal. Yeah. And that's health. So we know that touch is really important. So there's some really old research from the 70s or something, which has this really stunning data that you could keep babies clean and tidy. This is the Romanian orphans kind of scenario, but this is even earlier. Keep them clean, tidy, pop them back in bed, but don't cuddle them. Neonatal death rates 50% higher when you didn't actually give them a cuddle and give them that comforting, caring sense of touch. So touch is really, really important, and touch is really important for us as we age. There's a little bit of stuff, tiny bit of stuff, looking at touch deprivation in older people. And I think about that, you know, like when you lose your partner of 50 years, I've been with the same person for a long time now, who's going to give me the cuddle on the couch in the evening? It's going to be a pet that comes and gives me that nurturing sense and comforting sense. So again, and this is a cute little line that I'm just finishing with this one on. So this is about a puppy. He liked to be nursed, I liked to nurse him, and it was perfect. And I think that's how it is. It's reciprocal relationships that we have with animals. It's not always fluffy things. This is a, what are they called? Frill-neck lizard. Sorry, name dementia. Frill-neck lizard had this lady giving this lovely talk about how she, there's a soft patch or something at the back of it. I've not held a frilled-neck lizard, that just behind their ear, and you can just touch it, and he liked it, and he would cosy in, and she liked it as well, the same sort of thing. So this is the experience of having pets. This is how it's happening on the ground for us. So that takes me into the next part of talking about, so what are the ways pets can connect us? So they can give a sense of emotional bonding and what have you through touch. What can they do in terms of our social relationships? So, and this I noticed when I put the little title up, Dog and Sad Woman. I don't think she's necessarily sad, she's just contemplating. Some research that's quoted quite a lot is the notion that pets can actually work as social catalysts. And they build social capital within neighbourhoods for people, increasing neighbourly interaction. So, you know, the business about, you know, someone walks past with the dog and you, hello, how's the dog? And, you know, people talk to the dog, not the person. Well, you know, it defaults to the person a bit. So that's that business about they bring people in contact with others. But there's some really interesting stuff within that research, which is also showing that for non-pet owners, they can also have an impact as well in terms of increasing people's sense of community safety. So if you see someone wandering around your neighbourhood with a dog, walking a dog around a neighbourhood, it makes us feel like this is a safer place to be. And that's coming out in the research. And often that's older people mentioning that sort of stuff in neighbourhoods. There's an element of like, they legitimise social contacts. So, and this is where I need to introduce Bungie, who's now asleep and is our token dog. And I don't know how many of you have, there's certainly been a number of people who have talked and said hello to Bungie, who is Carmel, my colleague's hearing ear dog. They facilitate connections between people. So they're like these icebreakers, because it's not polite to just waltz up to some stranger in the street and start chatting, kind of. You know, like there's these social norms. But babies and dogs, you know, like it's okay, it's allowed. And the other thing I've learnt recently is trolleys, shopping trolleys. I've got a little shopping trolley. People say, oh, where'd you get that from? And one of the things, actually, this social catalyst business is that, so when we're talking about, you know, the sort of mushrooming of assistance and support dogs, is that they facilitate people getting out more readily, so the guide dog and so on actually gets people out, but they also facilitate the social interaction. So for someone who's isolated and anxious, first of all, the dog, you know, helps them to feel like they actually can go outside and, you know, head down the street to the shops. But then people stop and say, oh, lovely dog, how are you? And then they get excited about the dog. It becomes a social, because then you do actually have to acknowledge the person, don't you? Because that would be rude. That's the next step on. Yeah, and so it's facilitating social connectedness through this kind of, this catalyst role. So pets seem to work in that way really quite strongly and powerfully. I've got this was really interesting to me as well, is that a little bit of data about how maybe it actually generates like connections across groups of people who might not just automatically chat to each other. And so this is another little example from some of the research we've done. This was a woman talking about, their dog, and they took him down New Year's Eve down onto the jetty, and coming back there was a group of young lads. It was like it was going along the row, and every single one of the young lads with their beer in their hand, and they were patting him. And a couple of little kids were loving him, and they put rings around his neck that light up, the fluoro rings. So this is cross-generational connections, because by and large, unless you're actually related, I suspect, I may be wrong, you can clarify for me, we tend to talk to people of our own age group. So there's some interesting sort of social observation research where, older people talk to you. You go and find someone of the same gender, the same age group, and also the same ethnicity. We just, like that sense of sameness gives us a sense of safety as well. What's happening here is that the dog's actually breaking down a couple of those barriers. One is simply the age stuff, and the other is maybe a little bit of gender breaking down as well. So you've got young males who wouldn't normally chat to some older woman having a chat via the dog. So it's the stuff that's coming out in our data. It's not particularly, there's no research actually saying this is, we've got other studies on this at this point, because like I said, it's an emerging sort of space. So what we do know in terms of older people specifically, some of the specific research, is that pets are providing companionship, they decrease anxiety and fearfulness in older people. So, the clunk in the night could be a burglar, but it probably is just the cat knocking something off the telly again, So that sort of sense of safety. And just the business about, the dog that growls and, scares away the burglar kind of thing. So this sense of safety. And there's also this business about pets alleviating loneliness in older people. And loneliness is kind of the next big space. We've sort of had all this interest on obesity. This sort of next big topic that's getting lots of attention is loneliness. So in the UK, there's a Minister for Loneliness. I think in Canada, there might be one as well. And so what we're finding, and these little highlighted bits, just to pick this up. So what we know is that loneliness actually reduces your longevity. So people who feel that they're not connected with other people, that they're not needed, wanted, etc. So it's not just about solitude and being on your own. It's about that sense of meaningful connectedness and being needed and wanted and cared about by other people. When we don't have that, basically, it reduces our lives. And so that's, these are just a couple of research papers that I've got handy and so on. This is pretty consistent. We're discovering this now, that loneliness is basically a killer. And so that's where pets, like that soft stuff of pets, of just keeping you company, it's not soft, it's life-saving stuff. And so we've got this other field of research that we can start to connect our understandings of pets and human-animal relationships into. And that's particularly my area, has been making these connections. So this is actually, this uses the Blue Zone study, which is saying, but the, not the foodie side, the other side. So this was a paper I just did a year or so ago for the conversation. And the 4 things that are in the Blue Zone, remember those 9 factors that have been identified as creating longer lives? I was picking up on the social one. So the incidental activity, sorry, that one as well, which is what I've just talked about. The other was this notion of purpose. So pets give us a reason for getting up in the morning. I didn't want to get out of bed, but the dog wanted to go for a walk, or the cats needed feeding, or what have you. Or with people who had aviaries down the backyard, they're like, I have to get up and feed them and clean out the aviaries, etc. So they're giving us this purpose, this reason for being. There's also the regular de-stressing. So the touch stuff, watching the cat. I've got these foster kittens living in my bathroom at present. They are so funny. They're a bit vicious as well. You can't see, but I've got scratches all over me. Not because they tried. But there's this de-stressing, isn't there? And the touch is part of that. When you're stroking something, your heart rate's coming down. You're able to shed some of the stress from the day. So animals can do that for us. And also that sense of belonging. So, even if I've had a really cruddy day, and I've really mucked up quite badly, which we do, don't we? The dog doesn't know and doesn't care. The dog thinks I'm important. The budgie Birds were some of the interesting ones. The birds that start squawking as soon as you come in the door, kind of stuff. So there's this sense of another being, a living being, breathing being, who knows me, who thinks I'm important. And these things, when you compare it to what we know is happening in the Blue Zone study and what we're finding about what keeps people alive, these are factors that we get from our pets. So again, there's that link to the big population data about how pet owners seem to live longer lives, starting to look at, well, how might this be working? What's the causational stuff? So, oops. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button. Oops. All right, so pets and our emotions, just titles. And I put this photo here because I thought that was a really emotional photo. There's something quite stark about that picture. Anyway, so it made me think, oh, it's interesting. So what do we know about pets and older people specifically? So much of the research about pets and older people has actually been quantitative. A lot of it coming out of the psychological research area, but particularly the quantitative, not the counselling research field. And it's about measuring. But increasingly, we're realising that we need to understand, what kind of pets work for what kind of people and when. So that's kind of the next thing. And we're moving beyond this business of proving pets. So do they really work? Has been a question out there in the research field. Well, but do they really work? Everyone says they work for them, but do they really? Which, as a social scientist, that's when I go back to the kids stuff. Do kids really work? Well, some of them kill their parents, which doesn't sound very good to me. We wouldn't ask that question about children. Why do we ask it about human-animal relationships? So we're moving beyond this business of wanting to prove pets, prove something about them, to actually understanding the experience of having them. And if you want to understand experiences, you need to talk to people. So this is about pets and ageing, but ageing is a diverse population. So, the number of years you've been breathing air is one factor, but then we're all diverse, male, female, ethnicity. So we can learn from some of the broader research, which there are some pockets of research that are a bit different than the ageing and pets research. And there's particularly stuff around vulnerable groups. So homeless pet owners, we know we have a problem with increasing numbers of homeless older people, particularly women. So there's a definite connection there. So about 25% of homeless people actually have a pet. And probably when you think to yourself, you may have seen people around Adelaide, there's a few homeless pet owners, yeah. Which, if there's anyone doesn't need another mouth to feed, it would seem to me it's homeless people. So to me, that's actually a form of evidence of saying there's something really special happening here, because you don't need another mouth to feed when you're on the bones of your bum. And so what we find from talking to homeless people about their pets is that they give us companionship, unconditional love, they support emotional resilience. So these are people who are having a pretty rough time. The pets give them some nurturing. The rest of the world thinks they're a bit of a scumbag and what have you. They get treated like that. But the pet thinks they're lovely, the same as for you and me. They're also, for people that are homeless, stigma breakers. So there's this notion of kind of a redemption. So if you see someone who can kind of work two ways, actually. If you see someone who's homeless and they've got their pet, we do the same, that social catalyst stuff. People engage with them around their pet and so on. And people will give them food for the animal and money for food for the animal, etc. Can work the other way as well, where people, you shouldn't have a pet kind of stuff. So it does do both for people. But for the people that are choosing to have a pet and are homeless, this theme of somehow being redemptive and somehow redeeming them of being a bad person in society seems really powerful. And there's some interesting stuff around young people and homelessness and crime reduction. So young homeless people, where do you get your food? You steal it, you steal money to get the food, that kind of stuff. Often there's drugs involved, etc. But there's some research which shows that young homeless pet owners actually reduce their crime rates, because if they get caught, who's going to look after their beloved pet? So the pets actually work to reduce crime for those in those scenarios. So again, it's the complexity of life and humanity, isn't it? Then there's some interesting stuff around people with chronic mental illnesses. So again, vulnerable populations. And this researcher, Brooks, split it into emotional, practical, social, summarising. This is a review of just recent. When was their review? 2018. Yep, so this is a review. So pets are non-judgmental. So if you're saying really weird things, the dog doesn't judge, the budgie doesn't judge. Friends, even if they're pretty resilient, start to, go, oh, you're a bit loopy, perhaps you need to see the psychiatrist again, kind of thing. Which, sometimes that's really appropriate, but what people are saying is that their animals give them this sense of, I'm an okay person. No matter what I say, the dog's going to be okay with me. They make people feel safe, they provide comfort and affection. So obviously there's some themes here, isn't there? Practically, there's the physical activity and also the distraction from negatives. So if you're having a bad day, if the voices in your head are really driving you bonkers, the dog gives you a distraction, the cat, the budgie, they're another being to interact with and they do funny things, what have you. And then there's socially, again, that's that thing about how they work as catalysts and they increase people's interactions. And what you sometimes see when like in mental health services is that people talk to each other about the pets and so on. So it's a kind of safe topic. That's my observational stuff from working around those spaces. And then we have the stuff about people with chronic diseases. You can see the themes here. So the business about emotion management, enhanced sense of self, and this business about mediating human relationships. So across looking at these vulnerable groups, what you get is these themes. And can you all relate to many of those themes as well? Yeah, the sense of companionship, the sense of I'm an okay, whatever, like relating to these animals, they don't judge me, etc. And that sort of seems to me to give us some indications about how pets might work, particularly for us as we're ageing, and more broadly. Pets seem to be most powerful when people are vulnerable, so we all enjoy the companionship and that relationship with our pets. When we're vulnerable, when life's not going so well, it amplifies the impact. And to some extent, that's the nature of ageing, is that life becomes a bit, flakier. There's sort of multiple losses sort of stuff that happen as we get older. And so therefore, we haven't gone into this space yet very well in the research, but it seems to me that ageing is another vulnerable space and we can see the themes happening. So there's that sense of social ostracism, unpalatable realities, loss, grief, the pain of physical suffering, physical ailments, those kind of things. So we're aligning. As just with ageing, we start to see some parallels with those vulnerable groups. And there seems to be this general sort of sense of like, pets don't necessarily fix stuff, but they soften the harsh realities of life. They're like this cushioning, they're softening for us. And I think what's really important with this is that pets are animals we have a relationship with. So it's not just a matter of like, 2 pills and a pat of the dog per day, or, here's a dog kind of thing. It's actually working through relationships, and that's that purposefulness, meaningfulness that comes out of the Blue Zone studies, is that these are relationships that have a purpose and a benefit for us. And I think that, again, is something to be conscious of in not simplifying this space. So it's not just any animal. And I think what's really important as well is pets aren't substitutes necessary for human relationships. Sometimes they kind of seem to be operating that way because other humans don't want to associate with various, with people for various reasons. But I think what's really clear is that they're qualitatively different relationships. We get something different from animals than we do from humans. And that's really important to keep in mind. And broadly, that pets seem to buffer or enhance or balance human relationships. So again, it's that notion of not about fixing, but it's about creating higher quality of life, whatever's happening for us. So that's what seems to be happening. So, and that brings me to what I would call the dark side. Am I alert? sad and distressing information here. But yeah, so we're going to talk briefly about some of the stuff we've done around suicide and suicide protection with older people and their pets. So we did Pets Ageing. This did Pets and Health project, just interviewing older people. And you wouldn't generally think that when you ask the fairly benign question, how do your pets build your health, that people would start talking about suicide, or at least it certainly wasn't anticipated when we started doing this. But we did that. So we had 35 interviewees, and we actually, 12 people identified their pets as life-protecting. And within that, we had about 3 or 4 people with really, like, clinically indicated, risk factors for suicide, previous histories, PTSD, that kind of business. And then we had about 5 who would say, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dog, the cat, the what have you, and go, okay, so, how is it working for you? And they kind of, some people just don't, they tell you as much as they want to tell you. And our project wasn't about suicide, it was about a bigger understanding. So it wasn't our job to be digging away at people's emotions. And then we had about 5-ish who were, major life traumas, etc., which are, again, risk factors around this space. So how does it seem to work then? But what people were saying is that I wouldn't have taken my life if it weren't for having this pet. And so we developed a bit of a model, which kind of looks simple, but I think the amazing thing is that it actually does seem to be what works for people to stop them from taking their own life. And so I don't know if you know, but older men over the age of 75 have the highest rates of suicide in Australia. So, and that's a global picture, that older people have high rates of suicide. Now, the link between suicide and euthanasia, we're not sure, unexplored space. That needs to be considered as well. But it also says something about we're keeping people alive longer, we're not necessarily keeping them alive happier. And so this is really powerful information because it's really hard to stop people taking their own life. And what happens with older people is that first attempt is more likely to be the last attempt. They're more successful at it than younger age populations. So we really need to understand what stops people from tipping into the space where that night they just, bottle of red wine and dark chocolate and take the pills that the doctors give them because they're older. Doctors give older people pills. We want to keep people as far away from that fence, from that edge of the cliff as we can. And pets are one of those things that's showing up. And so what we had is this sense of the functionality of animals. They need feeding, walking, and they need knowledge of their care. So one of the sort of distanced examples is of a guy who was into reptiles, so I usually think, cuddly pets, they're what would keep you safe. Now, reptiles, and he talked about how the reptiles had saved his life because he got really interested in them. He started getting into reptiles because he was extremely depressed and he was awake at night. And what are reptiles? They're nocturnal. So he could engage with the animals at night. And then he got really interested in, how do I look after these animals and make sure they're cared for? Because they're specialist needs critters. And so basically from that he started getting online and he joined a group and met his next partner, etc. It's a long story over time. But it's kind of interesting in that this is again, so there was a functionality. The animal needs feeding and care and I need to provide it and I'm the only person that can do it and I need to get good at it and do it well. So this functionality of animals seems to work to protect people and it can be across a range of functions. Then we have this notion of presence, the notion that animals can be present when other people aren't. And again, the sort of nighttime stuff sort of strikes you as most significant. But there was one guy who had really graphic stories of suicidality. And he just kept talking about how the dog Missy was just there with him. So he had PTSD, he struggled to get him, he would be in bed for 22 hours a day. The dog was just there, people came and went, that sort of thing. The dog stayed with him. And another lady the same, talked about how she'd had a serious illness for a couple of years and her puppy, instead of heading off outside to play, had just hung around when she really needed to have company. So this sense of presence seemed to be really important. Animals that give us a purpose, a function, and their presence. And then this sense of being known by another being. So the animal knew. Somehow the animal knows me and responds to me. And within this, somehow these three things seem to work into this kind of sense of reciprocity. So with the reptiles, the guy talked about, I owe it to the animals. I owe it to the crocodile that he's got for saving my life. So there's this circular sort of sense. And again, this is about living beings and relationship. So I think that's really important. Oh, whoops. We'll go back. So these three factors seem to underpin suicide protection in older people with their pets. Pets as suicide protection. So the sense of reciprocity, that the animals I have a relationship with need me, love me, care about me, and that they would be impacted negatively should I take my life. So I had a lady who was able to identify which of her 3 dogs was the protective one. You know, Susie will be fine, loves my husband. Bobby, oh look, food will feed him, you know, doesn't matter who feeds him, but this dog will pine and will miss me. So in terms of where we might take this into the future, there's this need to have a sophisticated understanding that moves beyond just like giving someone a dog or a pet to realising that somehow there's got to be some nurturing, some building of relationship between these 2 beings, 2 living, breathing beings somehow. And that's into the future. So, 95-year-old lady from Hamada with her pet rooster. Special. I want to be like that. Even with the purple hair. So what we know about pets and older people in Australia though, so this is thinking about where we go with this information. So 62% of households have a pet. However, this reduces, now that's going to keep moving. No, it's not. It reduces as people get older. So only 48%, so it dips below the 50% once people get over the age of 65. Now that might partly be just people's choice, and there's some research around why older people choose not to have pets, the grey nomading, the cost, all that sort of stuff. But if pets are as important and as crucial to some people's literal survival as is starting to emerge, there's a couple of other papers recently also revealing how pets are really crucial for people in terms of the suicide space, older people. We really need to think about why there's this reduction from 62 to 48% and look at ways that we can do something about it, okay? So that's where we're thinking with our research. So why not pets? Pragmatic choices. What we do know is that some people, the hint is some people give up pets quite early on in ageing, for fear that they won't be able to take a pet with them into aged care, for fear about what will happen to the pet if something happens to me. And that's as much about that vulnerability of health as anything. If I get sick and have to go into hospital for a week, who's going to look after the dog? I can't afford for them to go into a kennel, etc. So starting to see some of the reasons. So we're starting to work on a couple of projects. So this business about pets, no pets, what might sit in between pets and no pets? So, you know, animal fostering. My mum doesn't have pets anymore, but she's the family pet sitter, which is fabulous for me, and for other people in the family. And she doesn't have the cost of them. She always worries about money nowadays. So that's working really well. And can we actually flesh out the different models that there could be in between having a pet and not having a pet in conversation with older people, so that those people that, as we get older, that do want to maintain this contact with animals, this close relationship with animals, that we increase the options because we know they're beneficial. That's that business going back to the start of what are the natural resources that exist to nurture people and to build our health. So we're doing that, and then we're looking at pets in aged care, and I've got Deb Burton here, who's just retired from UniSA, and they had a FIFO cat program, which was cats came in 3 days a week, and they weren't full-time, and they were brought in by the Animal Welfare League, and then they were taken home at night. So what we'd really like to see is how do we actually normalise this business and provide meaningfulness for people as they get older. And so the fact that they were animal welfare cats I think is really exciting because of literally those cats are on death row. And fostering has been the way of reducing euthanasia rates in the animal welfare field because previously if the shelter was full, those animals would be euthanized. But as they've more and more, the model that's being used by animal rescue is fostering. So the animals you see in the shelter are just a small proportion of the ones that are actually doing things like living in my bathroom and scratching my ankles. Yeah. So that's actually saving these animals' lives. And so that's really important. So older people are not just on the you know, what's it called? Above ground cemetery, I heard an older person call an aged care facility. We don't want to do that. We want people to feel like their lives are meaningful and worthwhile until their last breath, as much as we can. And so this means they're part of rescuing and stopping these animals from losing their life, literally. So it's really important. And what do we need to do, basically, to make this happen full time? So we're working on that with Uniting SA and with animal welfare. And this is a bit of a model. So we figured the crucial thing is animal carers, because at this point the funding in aged care is for people care, quite reasonably. But if animals are actually really important for people, then somehow we need to figure out how we can actually get animal care happening in there. So we got some ideas, and our first step is actually doing some evaluation research on trialling it and seeing what happens. But we don't actually have any money. And so our aim is to raise funds by crowdsourcing, and we're starting to work out. So watch this space. Oops, it was meant to spin around and it didn't. Watch this space, and we will be getting some crowdsourcing structures happening in the future. Okay, so I just want to finish with some cautions around this space, because I think it's really important. First of all, not everyone likes animals. So if we're going to do this stuff about going, okay, for some people pets are really important, they're even life-saving, we need to recognise that not everybody's into them, okay, and that's fine. And it's not, culturally, it's not just ethnicity. Farmers, and I had an honours student who was actually came from a family of meat workers recently, who was doing the pet stuff, I might add. That's the anomaly. Different cultures, different experiences and understandings and perspectives on animals. And the other side is that we need to be aware of the animal needs. So I've been talking about animals and pets as a resource for health today. My animal rights, and particularly the animal rights connections I have, would be very upset at me for using that terminology, because animals are sentient beings, other creatures with rights, needs, interests, etc., and we need to include them. So that's part of it. And the other is about just being conscious of looking after animals in the way that they need. So I work with Susan Hazel from the veterinary school at Adelaide Uni, and that's really important because she understands what different species need. I don't particularly, I have some ideas, etc., but sometimes it's quite surprising. So we need to be aware of animals, and that's my finish. And because when you do pet stuff, you get to put your own pet's pickies up. So this is Jack, and this is Happy. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Janette, for that. We've pretty much run out of time. We could probably have time for one question, perhaps, if you have one. Or there's a couple. Perhaps we'd better. 2 quick questions, and then you can ask Janette questions at the end.
Hello.
At my mother's nursing home, they have a robotic seal which they take around. Do you think that a robotic seal, even though it's got artificial intelligence, is going to perform the same sort of function as a real live animal?
I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question. There's certainly a bit of research happening around it. Yeah. It's at your workplace?
No, my mother.
Ah, how do you respond to it?
Well, they seem to like to pat it.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't go around very often, because someone has to take it around because it's an expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah, it's really, yeah.
It's soft.
Yeah.
Responds,
Yeah.
but it's not living.
It's not, I can't see how it can ultimately be the same as, but hell, robotics is just moving in amazing ways.
One more question.
Last year I visited Poland, and the year before the Czech Republic. And they had in the big cities a cat cafe, and they were so popular.
Yeah.
But in Poland, they had so many rules. You're not allowed to touch the cat, and people were terrified. But in the Czech Republic, you could cuddle it, and it was so much more of a relaxed atmosphere. And I think it was so good because these are highly densely populated regions, and it's good for children and adults to be able to just visit a pet for a quick coffee, chat, talk, fulfil all those sort of things.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is those two countries, obviously, like one country perhaps is using the animal rights framework, whereas the other country is more about the human's experience. Because that's one of the things that you do get is that tension between, because cats actually get quite stressed in public spaces. So that's been one of the discussions about aged care and, you know, like what kind of cats you need, ones that are not going to get really stressed with multiple people petting them. Yeah, so, yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Now, just a couple of things before I invite our two speakers to come up to the front. The first is to thank you very much for your attendance today and to let you know that the next seminar in July the 18th, is titled Continuing the Fight Against Cancer. We'll have two researchers speaking about brain cancer and also about ovarian cancer. So I think it should be a really, really interesting and stimulating session. Now, the recipe for positive ageing, we've certainly got some definite things that we've learnt, definitely things that we can do. So I would like you to join me in thanking our two speakers, and I'll give them a small gift by way of thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Is it chocolate?
Have a safe trip home and have an enjoyable Easter period. And we see you again in July, we hope. Thank you.
Red wine.
I was.
Did you get red wine?
That was excellent, Janette. I enjoyed that.
God